Yes. Streamed.
We
With the
were?
microphones.
We were streaming. We weren't hybrid. That's
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
that's true.
Right, right,
We
streaming, of
weren't
course.
Zooming, I guess.
Of course.
Okay, we are recording, we are live streaming, and so I will call to order this first monthly meeting of the new year, 2022, January the 10th. All village board members are present. Do we have any changes to the agenda? Nope. You mentioned you'd added something to the Dropbox, Jess.
I did. It's just part of the ETC. It's a document 6.3.
Okay.
If we're talking about things we added, I did put in a proposal that I think we need to maybe authorize for DPW, but we'll get there.
Okay. And we will have an executive session at the end of the evening to discuss several different personnel items. Item number 3 on the agenda is our first public comment period, privilege of the floor. I do see, well, one member of the public joining us via Zoom by the name of Yes. And of course, we have members of other area boards, other legislators present. So this would be the opportunity if anyone does have anything to direct to this board. Now would be the best time. I will take the silence as indication of no public comment. No public comment. We do have another public comment period at the end of the meeting. Should anyone wish to speak then. Item number 4 on the agenda is reports from representatives. So Ann Corman, Mary Bouchard, whichever one of you would like to go first or is prepared to go first, please proceed.
I can go first if you like.
Sure thing.
Let's see, let me pull my screen up here. So one of the things, I don't think I said this last time, but one of the things that I've been working and trying to push forward for about 4 years is a requirement from our industrial development agency when they give tax abatements to companies is to require a local labor requirement. And we just got that passed last month. So that's requiring 75% local labor. And at the first week of the year, we everybody was sworn in at the legislature. So out of the 14 legislators, there's 5 new ones. So that's exciting. And Shauna Black was voted in for our chair of the legislature and Deborah Dawson as our vice chair. And we had I won't say a mix up, maybe the timing was a little bit off for some tax exemption stuff. And so what happened was our assessment office sent out reminders to people who were getting low income senior and disability tax exemptions, a letter in mid-December. And then the next week, the governor made an exemption so that those exemptions are automatic. So then we had to send out another letter to tell people they don't have to apply for that. So if anybody asks you, you can refer them to our assessment office if they have any questions on that, because I know that was probably kind of confusing. Let's see, we are doing boosters. The rest is pretty much COVID. We're doing booster vaccination clinics every week in January. So we still have a couple of more to go, and those will be at the Ithaca Mall on Saturdays. And we've switched, the health department has switched to screening for people. Hold on a second, I have a cat trying to cost me. Can I get some help there? Thank you. Let's see, so when people are going to the mall for testing, which is done by the health department and the hospital, what we're asking for is people to only go there if they've had a positive exposure to COVID or if they're having symptoms. So we definitely want to make sure those people go get tested right away and get the better quality, more accurate tests. And of course, they still remain free. If people just want to say they're going to go have go around, have a gathering, or they're just curious before they travel or after they travel, if they're just curious, they want to rule it out before they're around some people. We're asking people to get the tests at the mall. I'm sorry, at the, like at Walmart, you can get them at the big Target. A lot of the pharmacies have them. But of course, when they first started putting out those tests, there wasn't a lot of people buying them. So they reduced the amount that they were manufacturing them, and then they had to take them off the shelves because they were expiring. And now all of a sudden in the last month, everybody wants a test. So they are really hard to find. And as you know, we got a bunch at the county, a bunch of home tests and also some masks and 95 masks. And we passed a lot of those on to the municipalities. So I saw you guys posted and are working on distributing those. And the last thing is, again, with the health department, we're shifting from, we're following the CDC guidelines and the state guidelines that are really asking people to be responsible and to do their quarantine or isolation, and versus us check on them, do their daily checks. So right now, the recommendation is if you have symptoms or you have a positive exposure, is to have 5 days of quarantine. And then 5 days, making sure you wear a good quality mask, like an N95 mask if you're going to be around other people. So for instance, you could go to work and do things like that. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Ann. Any comments or questions from the board beforehand? Thank you much, Ann.
Thank you.
Mary, Town of Ulysses.
Hi. Well, the town was pretty quiet over the past month. We didn't have a second meeting in December for the holidays. It would have been on the 28th. And then we had our organizational meeting where everybody gets appointed at the beginning of the year. We had that last year. We had that last week. And the village or the town is still looking for a deputy clerk, and we are going to be considering removing the residency requirement for that position. Currently, you have to be a resident of the town of Ulysses in order to be eligible to be appointed to that position. And given the small number of applicants that we've had, we are looking to make the applicant pool somewhat bigger. We are also looking for a planner. I know at the last meeting, I mentioned that we had hired a full-time planner, but somewhere between our offer and her acceptance and her start, she decided that she didn't want to leave her current job. So we are still looking for a planner. And at our meeting tomorrow night at 7, we'll be holding a hearing for the 2022 fire protection agreement, which is by and large a formality, but required by law. So that's about it as far as the town goes.
Excellent. Any questions from the board for Mary? Thank you, Mary.
Okay. You're welcome.
Item number 5 on our agenda is our consent agenda. We have meeting minutes from December 13th of last year to approve, as well as our claims abstract, which I will read through very quickly. We have a general fund abstract totaling $245,192.07. We have an EMS billing abstract totaling $14,558.05. A water fund abstract totaling $30,453.40. Sewer fund abstract totaling $173,824.65, including a large bond payment. Trust and agency abstract totaling $3,833.18. And so I would entertain a motion to adopt the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? Hearing none, then all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Moving right along, item number 6, we have board member reports, starting with myself. I have a couple of items just to quickly update the board on. We continue to effort to have the state make a positive decision in our favor with respect to Camp Barton. We have not heard any word from the governor's office about their interest. I did have a meeting with Fred Bond last week about something unrelated, but he did mention to me that the New York State Parks Commissioner is aware of the situation with Camp Barton. There are apparently 5 Boy Scout camps across New York State that are in a similar situation, and State Parks is considering whether or not to take any action on some or all of those locations. No time frame, but it is on their radar. So it's a possibility that they could potentially do something at the state level. The Boy Scouts of America, there, for those following along, their federal court case had a deadline of January 24th for the next phase or next step in the settlement. That has been pushed back to February. So that does give potentially a little bit of extra time to come up with a possible solution for the sale of the property. So that's where things stand. Not a whole lot of change from last month as far as the state goes. Anne had mentioned that the county had received a number of at-home rapid COVID test kits, as well as a supply of N95 masks, which they have distributed to the municipalities. I am in possession of that limited supply, and I announced over the weekend, and I'm announcing now that I'm opening it up to, based on the county's guidelines. So I should take a step back and say that the county notified the village that they would be distributing the supply to the village in the hopes that we would be able to distribute the test kits and the masks primarily to those residents who may have difficulty getting out of the house and or may have difficulty in the expense of either the test kits or the masks themselves. So I have already reached out to Juniper Manor to see if any of their residents are interested, and I will be supplying them with some test kits and some masks. We do have enough masks, one for each resident. We don't have enough test kits to supply every resident with one, so they will receive a small supply. I'm also reaching out, or have reached out, to Country Estates as well as Compass Manufactured Home Park. And then I'm also asking that if any village resident, the town of Ulysses has received their own supply. So if any village resident feels that they fit into that category of having difficulty obtaining test kits or masks, but they would like to receive one, that you can reach out to me directly, either via email, which is mayor@trumansburg-ny.gov, or you can call the village office at 607-387-6501. Let us know, obviously, who you are and what you're requesting. Your information will be held in strict confidence. And depending on how much supply we have available relative to requests received, I will do what I can to make sure that everyone who requests one, either a test kit or a mask, receives one. If the number of requests exceeds our supply, then I will maintain a wait list in the off chance that we get more supply from the state through the county. So Tammy, if you get any calls to that effect, let me know. Pass along the names and so on. I've only received a handful of emails at this time, so we'll see. I hope to have everything distributed. I hope to have everything distributed this week.
And Barton, I know you asked or mentioned earlier when you got the information, it didn't occur to me then, but the DFW might be a interesting contact as well, if you don't get response. Just thinking about who they may know. But you might get all the response you need.
An excellent idea. It's just for village residents, so we would have to keep it.
Yeah, we
narrowly
can tell them,
focused to them.
but anyway.
Okay. And then the last thing is just to mention, I don't often give TCOG, Tompkins County Council of Government, I don't often give TCOG updates, except as it applies to EMS, because there is an emergency services task force in TCOG, and I sit on that subcommittee. But one of the items that came up during last year's Tompkins County had to submit a shared services document to the state. And one of the topics that came up was IT infrastructure. And so an idea, and I ran it by Ben a few months ago, but our next meeting's in February, so I think hopefully we'll gain some traction this year, is there are a number of small municipalities. There are 17 municipalities in Tompkins County, including the county. So if we subtract the county, the city of Ithaca, and the town of Ithaca, that leaves 14 municipalities who all have varying levels or degrees of IT needs, most of whom interestingly kind of fall into our category. We have an individual who has done a great job of managing our IT infrastructure to this point, but we have no succession plan. We have no backup. And as we may choose to expand our IT offerings over time, it may grow beyond the scope of one person's desire to manage it. So what I'm going to be doing through TCOG is seeing if the other municipalities in TCOG are interested in a coordinated or group RFP of some kind to find an IT services individual or organization or company who would charge X per municipality. Perhaps we can get some type of economies of scale if they get a larger contract. So that'll be something I'll be updating the board on over time. I don't anticipate any pushback on that, but we haven't discussed it at TCOG yet. So hopefully the other municipalities would be interested. And that's it for me. There's a number of items, as I mentioned, to discuss in executive session to do with personnel as well as collective bargaining. So we will get into that then. Moving on to fire, TACC, ETC, CWIO.
Chang Chang. Okay, so let's start with fire. So there are 340 calls for the year, which is significant and represents 3,068 service hours. 86 of those, oh, that was just for the month of December. That was for the year. Sorry, I thought I had a training hours split out, but I don't. We have that for the February report at the State of the Village, February 5th. I'm sure it's all on everyone's calendars out there in viewing land. And huge success for Letters to Santa. There were 146 presents delivered, I believe. Look back to my other notes. And just really, 146 presents delivered in this, their 10th year. Really great feedback and letters from kids and letters from the community in support of that. It's really quite a production, and the Village of Mecklenburg helped out too. They delivered 7 presents, so thanks to that volunteer crew. There Breakfast was a success, as I think I reported on earlier, but maybe I didn't. The Winterfest, they sold out for the fundraiser for the tools, the rescue tools. So that's moving along well, and they are at something like 75% of goal. And as we all know, in fundraising land, the last 25% can be the hardest. Though maybe not. They've solicited some high-end gifts and also have some pledges that wouldn't be contributed yet in that 75% count. So they're not there yet. We all can continue to help as individuals of the village. We did successfully submit the radio grant and just waiting to hear on that. And they are planning more fundraisers for their tools. So they're looking at a chicken barbecue for Super Bowl Sunday, which is apparently something they've done before, and it'll be just chicken halves, which sounds great. Not that wings aren't awesome, but I'll take that whole half a bird. And then on the 21st, they're thinking about maybe another fundraiser that could be this program called Touch a Truck, where like you can go climb on and play on giant equipment, like big trucks and big tractors, and but we'll see. So that's definitely an idea. Don't get all excited about it, Keith Ann, and it might not happen. But the point there just being that they're really moving forward and attacking that fundraising program. Any questions about fire? So Gordon gave the Cam Barton update, and then I would say from the CUO side of things, which is the Cuda Watershed Intermunicipal Organization, the Park Foundation has granted bridge funding to hire a watershed manager for 2022 and 2023, which is fantastic. And their budget that they passed shows that they'll be able to fund that once they get where they want to go. So this bridge funding is fantastic. It means that they can accomplish what a board can't just do. And also, Tammy, if you haven't received it already, we're going to be getting dues letters from CUO. Just a heads up, those should be coming in the mail in the next week or so, I would imagine. And then additionally, last on CUO is that they are rebuilding the website. So if anybody here thinks of something that might be helpful information that you would like to be able to access on the website, feel free to share that with me and I can pass it along at the, I think it's January 26th meeting. Any questions on CUO? Okay, and I don't have any news to report from the Schumansburg Area Chamber of Commerce because I did not participate in last month's meeting, so that's on me. And I will participate this January and bring you more information in February. We did we mention that we have a new business in town? Did I mention that in December? Did we highlight the Gold Hammer? Is that what it's called? The jewelry shop on Main Street? So there was actually a ribbon cutting, essentially without a ribbon cutting, in November, to the end of November, and Atlas reopened. So in this world of the downtown corridor being what it is, to see a new business, and also really that business, the Gold Hammer, is, forgive me if I'm not saying the name right, I think it's that, is two businesses in one. So Dan Timmerman, who makes hand-sewn ultra light and ultra warm gear for outdoor experiences, is the sewing aspect in the back, and then Cedra has her jewelry shop in the front. And I think that really highlights that we are a village of artisans and a village of makers. So maybe the TACC can do more on that in the future. Okay, any questions or things you would like me to address with the chamber when I attend in January? General applause for them. Great, so I'll bring that. Okay, so if you would just turn your eyes to the T6B in the Dropbox, T-Bird Green Space Team. The ETC committee is acting on the notion that was set to them by the mayor, and I think also by the interest of this board, which is really piggybacking what we've heard in the comprehensive plan, that we want to make good use of our green spaces. And because as we started to look at just that, the Giant Park, which is not called Giant Park, but installing the gigantic giant, we really realized there's more green space and more people are interested than we thought might be in how we might use those green spaces. And so the ETC thought that it might be nice to have a sub-team, which we're calling the Green Space Team. And I have for you in this document the notion of how we might be able to do that so that we can be responsible to the mission of the village and also represent community interest, but still move forward and be comprehensive in scope. So I'd mentioned this before and told you I would bring you something more concrete so that we could see if you like the way that looks. So I won't read every word, but we're thinking that a team of 5 to 8 interested village citizens and then 1 member of the ETC as like the core working body would be useful, and that would, the committee itself, this team rather, would be overseen by the ETC, and then of course the ETC reports to the village. So no action can happen. It's really right there in the mission. The mission is to identify and then strategize the development and protection of our green spaces based on the comprehensive plan. So I'm asking today if it's possible, if we say, yeah, I think that's great, and let's move forward with that, and let's think about, we are missing one of our members. Karen has been absent to attend to family matters, and so I think February might be optimistic, but I think if we had a first meeting in March, we could have all our ducks in a row to be able to get some feedback from this board on who they think might be interested villagers and people who have either been on projects before or who have come to you and said, this is, I'm really interested in this. To, again, to be the core working group, there will be this aspect, as you can see in the plan, that village-wide feedback should be solicited and input gathered. And we have some notions on that through surveys or whatever. But the main work of the team will be literally identifying which green spaces we have on a map so it's clear, and then developing a community engagement strategy, and then figuring out, based on engagement and thought, what we should do with the green spaces. Does that all make sense? Yeah. Did I say green space enough?
Couple more times would be
Okay.
helpful.
Do you,
No, that sounds good.
Okay.
give a sense of, I like that the mission seems forward thinking, bigger picture, but there are like immediate things that are happening, like stuff that happens at the farmer's market, the idea for something around the stump that's there. Is that like just let that kind of
I
happen?
think that's that. Yeah, and that's a really good question, and we can bring that like to the team and to the ETC. It was more like, okay, we have this water tower space. Okay, we have this space that's the farmer's market annex, and we have this triangle here. We have that spit of land there, and what do we want to do with all of these spaces? Unless I think, especially the farmer's market is a unique, because it has its own functioning thing. It's something that we should take into consideration. But at this level, we're still very high level. Like, no, yes, we want a dog park, or no, don't ever develop this piece, or let's make this one for the veterans, or do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think we're at that.
No, that's
Did I
fine.
answer your?
Yeah, that's fine. That's kind of what I thought. I just wanted to make sure that like,
Yeah, and I think
Not
if any
always.
farmers market people are listening, and or if you talk to them and they catch wind, like, it isn't to dictate something that's already fully happening. They already operate on checking in with you
right,
and the board. I mean, that's
yeah,
good.
Okay.
And again, the roll up of this is, it's no decisions are made without the board. And at a certain point, the planning board might want to be consulted or whatever, however that goes. Any other questions about this? Pretty exciting.
We've done, the tree committee has had sort of brief discussions that kind of were trending in this direction. So that's nice to hear.
So you might know some tree committee folks that would be interested in engaging in this work.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, I don't know, everyone's time is the big question, but I certainly know some people who'd be interested. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, so I think like anything, it's as much or as little as you want to put in or put out. Like, it really could just be as simple as saying, we want to know everyone can use this public space. Here's a sign. Like, it doesn't have to be, it can start small and then it can grow over time as interest develops. So people with their time could have that. That'd be my caveat for them. Okay. Cool. So then I'll look to do that for March. Thank you.
One other thing I'd like you, we've talked about it briefly before, but one other thing you could put on your radar and possibly bring it up at the chamber meeting, now that I think about it, is how we want to, and everyone on the board can think about it as well, how we want to go about conceptualizing and planning for the sesquicentennial.
Yes. That is on the ETC's
Say
mind.
that 5 times fast.
Thank you.
Sesquicentennial. Which is on or about June of this year. But
Yep.
I'm not suggesting that we necessarily have to have a single day of celebration, but even if it's
Yes.
banners and signage and something all summer long kind of thing, it seems like.
There's great interest of that in the village and certainly on the ETC. And so that will definitely be a hot topic. Thank you for February. And Nana and I might get together before Karen has time.
Any other comments or questions for Jess? Okay, EMS Youth Street Tree Advisory Committee.
So we'll start out with the calls for last year. Covert 183, Hector 53, Mecklenburg 61. Mutual Aid 62. Village 271 and Ulysses 310 for a total of 948, excuse me. For last month, Covert 16, Hector 4, Mecklenburg 5, Mutual Aid 6, Village 35, and Ulysses 25. There's a notable spike in the village phone numbers. I don't really, it doesn't look like any particular event led to that or anything, you know, specific or identifiable, but just sort of a quirk of the data.
I did hear that there are some extreme cold realities that spiked some.
I didn't catch any of that in these, but I'm sure, you know, everything plays a role. I also had been going over some basic operations stuff in the EMS department. It looks like the mobile computers in the ambulances are slowly and or somewhat quickly now dying. We would like to replace them hopefully with iPads, something minimal that's sort of touchscreen. I mean, it's primarily so that dispatch information can come through while you're driving, basically. We haven't identified specifically what would go there, but I was hoping to approve up to 2,500 tonight, so that Roden and I will have a meeting with all of the EMS staff tomorrow night. So I was hoping that at that meeting we could discuss the specifics and go from there. We kind of have a general idea. Joel Fay and I had talked about basically just iPads because the touchscreen functionality is nice, and like in terms of processing power, the demands aren't really high. So it's not you know, I think previously the idea of something much more advanced and high intensity had been I don't know, discussed, thrown around or whatever, but that's really what we're leading. So if we're up for it, I think I would make that motion that we approve up to $2,500 to be used for I guess mobile computers for the EMS department.
So could we do a reserve?
That's actually an interesting question. I don't think it needs to. I think it can come out of equipment.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any questions or discussion?
Can I just check? Let me check 1 second just to make sure that the equipment is the right line. My computer is being very slow, but well, actually that's a motion on the table. Well, this isn't loading. I'm fairly confident that's it, and if it's not, we can come back. I don't believe we've used the equipment line this year, so.
Any questions or comments?
Ben,
Yeah,
did you get a forward email from me? Was a quote from Jeff
yes.
for the two? Oh, okay.
Yep.
And they were
thank
like-
you.
They were like $2,000 a piece.
Yeah, we are going a very different direction,
Okay,
but thank you for looking into it.
okay.
Motion on the table is to spend up to $2,500 on mobile devices for the ambulances. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed?
I also, for the tree committee, we were just approved for our 3rd year as a tree city. which is fun because I just now in the mail got the second year memorabilia. So that's great. There are actually some steps that's sort of an initial approval, then it goes to Albany, and then it goes to the National Arbor Day Foundation organization. So there's several layers, but I believe, you know, if we were going to celebrate, this would be the time. And on the youth commission side, I think there isn't much to report. We did have a discussion about potentially creating a fundraising subcommittee, which I've been meaning to reach out to Jess about, and maybe link ETC and some youth commission, but I'll follow up on that.
Okay.
On that later.
Okay.
We have generally done usually a yearly or twice a year fundraising event for the youth commission. Historically, it's been directed at programs specifically. So one year it was the Big Friend, Little Friend program. I'm forgetting what specific programs other years have done, but this would hopefully be an extension of that. And I think the idea is to maybe have something more broad and comprehensive as far as a fundraising plan.
Okay.
So we'll see. I'll reach out about it.
Great.
But I believe that's all as far as the report goes.
Okay, any questions or comments for Ben?
Seems like things like the Tree City, or when we became I forget the exact term, the climate smart community, things like that could all be wonderful highlights part of the sesquicentennial.
Yeah.
Basically achievements of the past 150 years.
That reminds me of another important update, which is that after, you know, my somewhat paternity leave, I've now gotten back into the clean energy communities thing. We are, I believe, hopefully going to be getting 15 to 20,000 in grants from NYSERDA. So that money can only be used towards, you know, green energy sustainability type initiatives. So, you know, that's a long way off. Those that haven't been approved yet. And then once they are approved, there's sort of a process to get the money that I'm sure Ben remembers. But it does have to be specific green projects. So just sort of get wheels turning now. If anything comes up that is specifically in that vein. My sort of default placeholder project has been, you know, solar panels on the DPW roof or something along those lines. But if there's anything more creative or things, Ben, that maybe you had in mind, but that didn't happen, this would be kind of the time to start thinking about those things.
We keep getting rain. I know a couple places for high-end micro hydroelectric producer.
Yeah.
I mean,
In front of Carver's house.
or the creek,
Yeah,
anywhere,
that's
my
true.
house. It's a lot of
I
good
like
places.
Keith's backyard.
Yeah,
for
my
a little-
backyard.
Yeah.
It's gotta be a write-off, right?
Little sluice right there.
But yeah, that really is it. Thank you for driving that for Anna.
Okay. DPW, water, sewer, CPZR, and farmers market.
All the things. All right, I'll start with farmers market, just to say not much to report. It's kind of in between market seasons. I know they're doing some kind of end of year, beginning of new year planning. And we'll see what comes of that. They're also working on their budget. On the CPZR side, let's do that first. We've got just kind of continuing to make progress on residential zoning. It continues to go well. We've got our subcommittee is met for the second time to look at mobile home parks and planned development areas and cluster developments, feeling that there's maybe potential for synergy there, maybe not. We're still sorting that out. But the rest is continuing on to just touch on all the kind of auxiliary sections that refer to zoning, the residential zoning that's kind of later on, like parking and signage. There's some secondary pieces there. I did talk with EDR today on working through how we want to engage with them for the zoning. So in the original RFC or RFP, it included comp plan and zoning. But we went fairly far afield from what was in there for the comp plan. So we're looking at probably treating this as kind of a separate piece. So we kind of talked through what we would like, what I'd like EDR to focus on. Primarily, it's going to be with the process of taking it from the committee through reviews with any boards that we may want to put it through, planning board and zoning board, as well as this board, public review, making sure all those ducks are in a row, proper motions are had and that sort of a thing. And then basic kind of formatting editorial pieces for the actual document. So the committee will continue to basically do all the heavy lifting as to what changes, but I'd appreciate their help on adoption and all the finer bits of linkings and table of contents and all that kind of like formatting stuff that will make it more user friendly, ideally links to glossary definitions and that sort of thing. But I don't have anything specific, but they will be working something up and probably come back to that next month to talk through what that looks like. And then on DPW water sewer, kind of highlights of the past month or so is that things have been a little bit slow. They've been working 1 to 2 folks down through the whole month. And will continue to be 1 person down through, I think, at least beginning of April at this point. So fortuitous time to have brought on a 5th person this fall. Dusty and I met with Jess and we did talk about Main Street and decorations and what that might look like kind of going forward. And then we also talked about what could we do kind of near term. So the DPW put up the snowflake lights that we had at the little village and did some extra tree wrapping to try and make that a point of focus. And I think it's mostly worked. The LED lights, solar LED lights, not so great in Trumansburg as you might expect, but it was worth a shot. They weren't particularly expensive, but we might look at something else in the future.
Do you have any idea, and I could ask Dusty, how long it took them to wrap?
Sounded like a morning.
Yeah, so that's awesome.
Not particularly long.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. And so I just want to point out, we're pretty excited. There were only 4 currently functional snowflake lights. 2 are on the village and 2 are on the children's village. Great. Okay.
Very nice.
Thanks.
Dusty also completed the LED training. That was the last, well, almost the last piece of the LED conversion. We're still waiting on LED lights for all the decorative lights on Main Street. But the training allowed us to make changes to the schedule. And so that means that we should now be seeing lights around the village at a dimmer rate in the evenings, which mostly people have been very happy with the lighting, but we haven't had a couple of complaints. So hopefully this helps mitigate that in some way, but that went into effect end of last week. And then let's see, I would say the other big thing is Dusty and I are working on kind of a 2022 plan that we're going to review next week. Just trying to plan out the large projects that we want to accomplish over the year and have that for budgeting and stuff. So we're kind of getting our ducks in a row for this upcoming year. The one thing that's in the Dropbox is that Dusty's looking into a kind of a task tracking software. You can have things pushed to people's phones. They can have a digital board up in the office to kind of point out what needs to get done for the day. You can schedule recurring events and recurring maintenance and sort of things to remind you of these sorts of things. So you don't have to kind of think through them yourself. I think it's going to be helpful, especially when we look, part of that 2022 plan is starting to build more of those maintenance plans of exercising water shutoff valves and so forth, so that when there's a water main break, they don't find out that the valve is sealed, frozen shut at that point. They've figured out earlier, that sort of a thing. And so, Vicky, I know we had talked about this. I wasn't entirely sure if you know, or maybe you had said Royden might have an idea. Like, this is a monthly fee with a contract, though it's cancelable within 30 days of written notice at any point without penalty. I didn't know what, if anything, I need to move or we needed to.
It didn't look like, I mean, it didn't look like to me that it needed a signature, but I assume that all service agreements should be run by the board members just to agree on it.
You would need a resolution to authorize either myself or Vicky to sign the agreement with Landport.
All right.
The dollar amount is not relevant.
Okay.
Because it's so low. But one of us has to be, Vicky could be authorized to sign the agreement
All right.
on behalf of the village.
So I will move that we authorize Vicky to sign this agreement with Landport for work order management software for the DPW.
Second.
Any questions, comments, discussion, or conversation?
Do I need to do anything, Ben? Besides sign it?
I don't think so. I double check with Dusty, but I think that's it, is my understanding. I think, Dusty has already had a chat with him. My understanding is once we sign this, they'll set everything up and turn it over to Dusty. And my impression is that they're also, the library is also using this for managing facilities there and comes well recommended.
But they'll contact me about like a credit card number to bill us monthly.
Yeah, I think you and Dusty can hopefully sort that out.
Okay,
Yep.
okay, that's fine.
Yep, hopefully there's enough in the 2 documents. I think I forwarded to you. They're also in the
Yeah.
Dropbox, but if there's anything
Okay.
else. Yeah, it's Dusty.
Okay,
Probably actually have Dusty sign this, since it's addressed to him. It's a DPW expenditure, it's not village-wide.
I'm happy to authorize Dusty too, as a separate. And
So then I would offer that as a friendly amendment that we authorize the DPW supervisor to sign this agreement. If that's acceptable.
yeah. Even
Any
easier.
other-
I'll let him know,
Yeah.
assuming we pass such a thing.
Any other comments, questions, or conversation on this? What's the training like for the DPW staff?
I don't know that specifically. I know Dusty talked through kind of the features and whatnot. And I assume there's training for him. I know he envisions him and I believe possibly Casey having kind of right access to it and be able to change things and so forth. And then everyone else would just be able to get the updates and kind of see things. So I suspect it's less of an intensive training for everybody else. And I did ask that both Gordon and I are able to see that as well, which Dusty was obviously in support of.
Will there be a hardware purchase associated with this software?
No, it's all by your phone and your computer. It's all online.
Okay, cool.
If anything, I think Dusty was, might get an extra monitor to put it up in the office, but I think he also might have one around too, so.
Okay. Then all those in favor of authorizing the DPW supervisor to sign this agreement with Landport, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
And the last thing is just a brief update on stormwater management. That is something that's on my mind and looking into, and we're looking to schedule some time with the town to discuss any possible collaboration there as they're looking at similar things. I may have brought this up last month too, but that continues to be on my plate and working with Gordon to chat with the town. That's it for me.
Okay, any questions or comments for Ben? Police, Keith.
First, the monthly calls for December, 211 calls for service. 4 calls supporting outside the village. Assistant Tompkins County Sheriff with 1 medical assist reported overdose, traffic complaint regarding a speeding vehicle, suspicious person, and assist New York State Police with the DWI investigation. Of those 211 calls, there were 6 that were criminal, 2 larceny/theft, 1 domestic dispute, 1 harassment, and 2 frauds. Almost went into a 12 days of Christmas thing there, but it just would have been a little too. We will be installing and training on the live scan machine later this month. You may recall we got a grant for that. This is a piece of equipment that will help with speed up processing, connect better into county systems and save our officers a lot of time. So they'll won't have to spend so many hours in the office doing the stuff. They can be back out in their cars on the roads. So we're looking forward to getting that going. We will be reconvening the LEAPS committee on January 20th. Some of the agenda items laid out. It's an update from Chief Nelson. Discussion on whether or not we want to post minutes of committee discussions and/or members' names. I created a Google Doc for people on the committee as they see police reform related topics or public safety regarded topics kind of in the national news or happening in other cities, where they can drop in links to those articles as a means of having discussion. Because right now we're only meeting quarterly, so it's easy to forget things that you see in the news. But if you see a story and you think, oh, I wonder how that pertains to the village of Trumansburg, we drop it in the Google Doc, and then when we meet, we can go through them all and say, yes, that's something we can think about in Trumansburg, or that's a New York City thing. That's not really a 1,800 person village thing. Just as a way to kind of, I think, all news and all politics are national now, so everyone's, if you see something on the news that happens somewhere else, you feel like that could happen here, or we should be addressing that here. So, and then Gordon's going to provide, I think, an update on the county-wide reimagining process. There was a recent hire at the county level of the person that's basically going to be leading the charge on countywide law enforcement reimagining as part of the plan that was adopted by the city of Ithaca and the county. And I think we'll eventually play some sort of role in that. Gordon commented on this on Facebook, but I think it probably bears mentioning at the meeting too. There was some chatter online with regards to, kind of implying, can the mayor, can the police chief essentially help with cracking down on mask wearing, local
enforce
businesses,
CDC policies.
enforcement. And, if you missed it, I think Roar did a very good job of basically outlining essentially who's been made responsible for enforcement. And we can debate whether or not that's fair, but at the moment, it's it's being put on the businesses to enforce it. And so just wanted to put that out there. And Roar, if you want to speak more to it, please do. But if somebody's wondering, we got to call the police because people aren't wearing their mask, it's not as simple as that. And Roar, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I had received some from a handful of folks concern about instances where they've seen individuals enter a public space or public business and not wearing a mask, or even at times refusing when an employee or someone at the business said, you need to put a mask on. And I think it's important to understand that the various mask mandates have shifted over time. And the current New York State mask mandate it does mandate that individuals wear masks when entering a business or public space, but the responsibility of enforcement is on that business. There is no penalty. There is no enforcement mechanism on the individual at all, not even from the health department side of things. The health department does have the authority to fine the business, however, for not being able to effectively enforce or force someone to wear a mask, which puts the business in the very difficult position of either figuring out how to kick someone out of their store at a time when small business would rather not kick anyone out of their store, and or leaving us in this kind of weird in between place where we're not sure who can enforce what. So that was the point of my post. There's actually literally nothing that can be done legally from a law enforcement standpoint to force an individual to put a mask on. I suppose at the extreme, if a business owner asks someone to leave and they refuse, then of course they can call the police and ask them to remove the trespasser. But that again, the individuals who, and again, this is not a debate about whether masks are effective or not, or whether mandates are effective or not. The reality is that when someone chooses not to follow a governor's executive order, and that executive order penalizes or could potentially penalize the business for the individual's decision, then in a time when we like to support small business and we like to shop local, all I did was, or all I am doing is asking that the individual who would just as soon not wear the mask consider the impact that it's having on the business that they're choosing to go in the first place. So let's not make running a small business any harder than it already is
Good, thank you.
from that perspective.
Yeah, I think that's the moral of the story is if you care about the local businesses, especially the local businesses and small businesses that you're patronizing, then just maybe do what they ask, because you're only going to get them in trouble, not yourself. But just jumping back to the LEAPS committee, another reminder that, these are meetings that are open to new participants, without the feeling that you have to commit long-term, you just have an interest in learning more about various public safety issues, then we would love more attendance. And that'll be January 20th here in the village meeting room. Last couple things, I believe we listed or will soon be listing an opening for a crossing guard at the school. I believe this is the afternoon shift where we're looking for someone to fill that position. Requires minimal training. So you have your afternoons free, looking to make some Garrett's money, there it is for you. You can't do Garrett's before being a crossing guard, save that for afterwards. But I know from when we explored adding a crossing guard to, I believe, Wigan South, this is not an easy person to find. So if you know anybody or know someone who knows somebody, they can follow up with the village or Chief Nelson. Last thing is, Warden Chief wants to give an officer a raise. Is that something we do now as part of approval? Or is that a personnel matter?
It's a personnel.
That we save?
We'll save that one.
Okay. To be revisited. And that's it.
Any questions or comments for Keith?
Is that crossing job, the job posted? Or the details of the,
Chief thought it was posted. I don't know.
on the village website? I'll look. I mean, someone who would be interested might want to know the parameters and the compensation
It'll be on the county website. It's posted.
on the county website. Okay.
But we could certainly post a news item stating that we're looking for a crossing guard and then link to the job listing. Because they will have to apply on through the county. That. Okay, anything else police related? Okay, treasurer, Vicky. You're muted, Vicky.
Sorry. The first thing I have is for the board to authorize Warden to sign the fire and EMS contracts.
And so I would entertain a motion to authorize me to sign the fire and EMS contracts with the respective towns once we receive them.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
The second I'm sorry, the second thing is we have the Zoll's maintenance agreements for the auto pults and the service agreements that we have. And they total, it's in the Dropbox. 5,200.
Is it not the 5608, Vicky?
5608. Yep, that's it. So I would like to request that the board pass a resolution to withdraw those funds from the EMS maintenance agreements reserve.
So moved, subject to permissive referendum.
Correct.
Second,
Motion and a second. $5,608. That's the total. Any questions, comments? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, Vicky, you're 2 for 2.
Yay. So the last thing, I know that Warden order put on the agenda, but I also had it in my calendar to actually do tomorrow, is to put out a doodle, unless you guys want to decide tonight, on dates in February and March for the budget working sessions.
Doodle.
yeah, doodle.
Doodle tomorrow is fine.
Okay. Okay. I assume that's what you were getting at, right, Rorden?
Yep, and let's start that poll with that first week in February.
Oh, okay. I believe I've received all the bank statements as of today. So I'm hoping to get December closed on Thursday. So once I get that, I'll add them to the budget is in the Dropbox right now. It's not perfect yet. I'm still kind of working on it every day. But it will be updated and it'll show what the balances are as of December 31st and give a projection for May 31st.
Okay,
I will have some things coming from you. I talked to Dwayne today about our 2021 audit, and there is some additional budget modifications he would like done. I'm going to send that to Warden first and then with an explanation to the board, because those budget modifications will have to be passed in February. And Dwayne will be at the February meeting to give our audit. He said everything looked really good this year. There was a couple of over expenditure lines that's what we're trying to take care of now. But all in all, it was a really good audit. Working on insurance quotes for the budget. I don't know. The days seem to fill up with things. So if anybody has any questions.
any questions for Vicky? Okay, thanks, Vicky.
Sure.
Clerk Tammy.
Hi, everyone. So for the month of December and the first week in January, water billing, of course, was the priority for the billing period. I've been working on the state of the village planning. I pick up the postcards from WordPro on my way in tomorrow morning. So I will do my best to get those out in the mail tomorrow, if not tomorrow, Wednesday. By the time I get them all labeled. So I've been working, actually talked to Matt Taylor, Chief Taylor. We're going to turn the firehouse calendar that we've kept in the office the last, I don't know, 10 or 12 years into a digital format. It seems like the firehouse is getting used more and more. for trainings, not just for fire and EMS, but we use it and we do have a couple of exercise groups. So it would just be nice to be able to log on and look at that rather than to have a paper calendar. So I'm doing that, working on some of the forms that we use regularly in the office to get those to our webmaster and get those put up on the website. The next one to come on should be the temporary event permit. And I need to check in with Nick at Finger Lakes tomorrow about that. And also, I'm sorry?
I was just gonna say, Nick actually reached out to me today. He said it's still on his to-do list. He got a little bit behind.
Okay, no worries. So I'm working on a couple of the other ones, Ben. It sounds like maybe
Okay.
the fillable might be the way to go. So we're gonna give that a shot and see what happens.
Great.
And I did spend quite a bit of time on the website last week. I think all the board pages are up to date, with the exception of tonight's meeting information being attached, and I'll get to that before the end of the week. And then probably the only other thing we haven't mentioned is Vicki and I have been making some changes in the office, just aesthetics, turning some things around, trying to get it, I don't know, looking a little more like a professional office, and getting things arranged so that we're both closer to the window and to the customers and to our residents. Other than that, unless someone has questions, I don't think I have anything else.
I actually have two questions. The document, the calendar, the digital calendar for the fire hall is just a staff document, correct?
Yes.
Cool. And then, Tammy, the Rotary is interested in doing the rubber duck race again. They did it last year to coincide, which was really fun. They are purchasing new ducks because they want them to be shiny. But they did it last year in coordination with the Horseback.
Yard sale.
But
Oh, okay.
May would be better. May would be better. And so I wanted to check in with you and see if there's any reason why we couldn't say, yeah, do it the same day as the village yard sale.
No reason whatsoever.
Kind of fun, right? Duck
Yeah.
race, yard sale. Okay, cool. I'll tell them that.
Sunshine, 70.
70 May 14th. Okay,
Sure.
we'll just make that happen.
Settle
All right,
the
cool.
things.
Thank you.
You're very
They
welcome.
haven't officially decided that, but they reached out to see if that would be a good.
Okay, yeah, just keep me posted and I'll put it on all of the things that I put out for yard sale day.
Yard sale, fantastic. Thank you.
All right, you're very welcome.
Any other questions or comments for Tammy?
If you have to visit a yard sale to get a duck. Probably not
You don't have
in
to.
Rotary's best interest.
You have to visit the Rotary table to
Yeah.
get it done.
Item number 7, old business. Any items of old business? Item number 8, new business. I am formally introducing the notion and concept of since we're going into budget season, of a sidewalk capital plan. Sidewalk capital plan, in my mind at the moment, subject to everyone else telling me that there's a better way to do it, consists of ongoing and continuous grant applications for sidewalk on state roads. That I think is the only place we're going to get grant money for sidewalks, combined with an annual allocation of village funds for smaller sections on village roads. Similar to, at least in concept, similar to how the volunteer group has taken on stretches of sidewalk in the past, but adding capital, not just adding financial capital, not just human capital in the sense of DPW assistance. Part of what spurred this on is we talk about sidewalks every year. Feels like that's going on since time immemorial. So let's actually do something about it. But the other piece of it too is I met Ben Carver and I met with a couple of board members of the conservatory. They are applying for some grants for restoration, renovation, et cetera, of the conservatory building. And one of the big issues is their stormwater runoff into their parking lot, and where that water goes kind of curls down and sort of half hits and half misses a drainage culvert. But then that leads to water running down the slate sidewalks, and of course those slate sidewalks are in a lot of disrepair along the front side of the conservatory, and then curling down Union Street. So it's not an overly long stretch of sidewalk. I do know that there's a lot of foot traffic there, not only during village events. I know that during Winterfest there was a lot,
Yeah.
but even on a nice day, a nice afternoon in the middle of summer when people are walking around the village, because there is, you know, Saturday afternoon or evening, say, there is use of some of those other parking spaces, some side street parking and so on. So this is a two-part issue. The conservatory is asking the village to sign on to a letter of support for a grant that they are applying for. The grant application deadline is this Friday. So they are asking if the village is supportive of their grant application, and specifically they're asking for a letter of intent from the village to improve that sidewalk. Doesn't have to be specific as to exactly when or how much it'll cost or how we'll do it. But it does have to, the letter would need to indicate that the village is targeting that spot for sidewalk improvement in 2022, which then leads to this concept of a real capital plan where we perhaps either with the Green Space Committee or the Street Tree Committee, which I know has been reluctant to tackle sidewalks, or just this board, which I'm perfectly fine with that being the way we do it, targeting and prioritizing village streets for sidewalk improvement or installation in some areas. I realize that that puts whoever is in that position, I realize it puts them in the further position of angering people who are further down the list, since everyone wants sidewalks, but hey, we're used to angering people, right? So that's my proposal, and I'm opening it up now to you all to comment.
So this is, or otherwise, it's kind of an awkward time to remind you that Ben and I actually are a sidewalk committee. Along with
Yes.
Dusty.
Yes,
But so one thing,
happy to have the two of you decide priorities for.
so we had actually talked about this section of sidewalk in particular. It really is a primary connector between like
Yeah.
the main arteries of downtown to that whole side of the village. So I think that's in terms of that, in terms of our sort of broad strategy, it fits perfectly. And one thing you didn't mention is that we also talked about potential use of the parking lot, which I think alleviates to some degree some of my, maybe it's just me, but I think broader concerns about parking, which to me is really good. So this feels like a lot of boxes being checked. Sort of
Parking lot
simultaneously.
collaborating with the conservatory to use their parking lot.
Yeah, as
Okay.
a sort of quasi-public,
Yeah, okay.
occasionally public option. That stretch, the sort of Union Street becomes kind of the overflow parking as
Yeah.
it is for downtown. So extending that up to their parking lot, especially, you know, during winter months and that kind of thing makes a lot of sense. The one thing that I had realized is that stretch is also somewhat tricky because of the pit, like the hill is quite steep.
Yeah. there's
So whether
that
you need,
reversion function.
it's the kind of thing where I think the municipal involvement actually might make it might be like 10 times more expensive because we'll be subject to stricter ADA guidelines if it's a public project. So that, I don't think this affects whether we do the letter of intent, and we should do that anyway and be supportive of them for its own sake, but we may want to tread a little bit carefully when we start getting
Yeah, I think there's different versions of this. I mean, first we have to decide if the village is willing to commit money. Commit village taxpayer money to the improvement and or installation of sidewalk on village streets. Part two of that, because I mean, that's a yes or no, right? We have to decide that first. Part two of that is how we go about implementing that. There is the ongoing coordination between volunteer groups, taking care of T-Bird and so on with DPW help version. A financial commitment then just helps pay for materials and perhaps, you know, doing longer stretches kind of thing. There's the actual village contracting for the work, piece by piece, which would be a small contractor because the large, the big contractors aren't going to do 200 feet of sidewalk on a village street. And then this third piece to that, which I know came up a few years ago and actually led to not doing anything, which I think was unfortunate. But the third piece is, do we start looking at sidewalk districts? So sidewalk districts are tricky because now you're creating a special taxation district where the individual property owners are paying for the sidewalks in their area. I know I've been approached by some people who think that would be a great idea where they live. And I know that there are probably other sections of the village where people would think that's a terrible idea. So I think that's something where we have to take longer to think about how we would actually, what would the logistics of that be? Are we talking about just infrastructure improvement, maintenance, or are we talking about ongoing, are we talking about salting, plowing, all of that? Are we going to start treating, and I know this was a part of what torpedoed the last time we had this conversation some time ago, was, are we going to put ourselves in a position where we've got 8 or 9 miles of sidewalk spidering throughout the village, which is about what it would be if you imagine every piece of slate, there was actually a sidewalk there. Are we going to have 8 or 9 miles of sidewalk in the village and then task DPW with maintenance? That's a long morning when there's snow. That's a couple additional employees, at least seasonally, if not longer. So that's a bigger issue. But I think we can tackle those things one conversation at a time, starting with, do we want to do that? If the answer is no, if we kind of want village streets to be less walkable, if we don't want sidewalks on village streets, except where they are significant arteries that connect to the main street, like the long run of South Street, well, that's a strategy. If on the other hand, the strategy is more like everywhere there isn't sidewalk, where we know people walk in the road, we should try to find sidewalk space, then we're looking at a capital commitment. And I guess I've been on both sides of this fence. I've been agreeable with the way we've done things with respect to sidewalks, which is grant money for big pieces, and everywhere else kind of, we'll see if Alan Vogel and company get to it. I think I'm shifting on that. I think I'm shifting towards, as I see what the real estate market looks like, and I see where people are buying homes, and I see why they're buying homes in a place that's walkable to downtown so they can go get dinner. I think that's part of the charm of the village and why people choose to live here. And I think that is deserving of a financial commitment. And whether that's 25,000 a year or 50,000 a year, I think we'll figure that out at budget time. And obviously apply for every grant under the sun. And once in a while, if we pick up some grant money that will cover, if we can kind of try to tie it into a state road and this road happens to connect to it, kind of thing, then great. But I think if we look how we handle our CHIPS money, which I realize some of that is state money, but if we say we want to repave 3/4 of a mile of road a year, and that means that every 10 years we will have repaved everything, and then we start over again. I think if we apply that kind of a concept to, we're going to do a few 100 feet of sidewalk a year, and if we don't have the volunteers that year, we're going to pay someone to do it. And if we have a lot of volunteers that year, then we save money. Then I think that over the course of, say, 7 to 10 years, call it, we could potentially see usable sidewalk everywhere that people want it in the village. And that's not to say we want to create unlimited amount of impervious surface, but I think we have enough. We were identified once upon a time as a particularly walkable village. We have enough people who take advantage of that. I think it's deserving of the spend.
So it turns out I have a lot of things I want to say about this topic. So I'll try to boil it down.
That's
into
why we're
concise.
ahead of schedule.
I think that So on this, at the top level, it ticks the comprehensive plan, which everyone in the community said, we want our village to be walkable. It ticks the health of the humans if you actually walk. It ticks the health of the planet if you're walking and not driving. The 3 blocks that some people would drive because they don't have good sidewalks, for sure, especially in an aging community, though that demographic might change. Then you might have a strolling community. You need a sidewalk. And it also ticks the health of the downtown corridor to help that traffic come down and spend time and not just get to a destination and leave immediately, if that were the case in a car. So yes to all of that. And then my questions would be, yeah, what are the ramifications to the property owners? Is that already not their property? And forgive me for not remembering from my time on the planning board, how that goes, who then maintains it? What do you have to say to that? And then with regard to impervious surface, would we consider a viable walking path that isn't necessarily paved? If it's going to be some working with the landowner, right? If you want to put buckwheat hulls down, that's always walkable and safe, but you're going to shovel it because Watkins Glen makes you shovel. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of space. So I will definitely interested in putting village funds towards a program all of the street paving.
So the last question is the easiest one to answer. If it's in the village right of way and the village is involved in the installation, it has to be ADA compliant.
Okay, so it couldn't be, it
necessarily
has to be a specific.
necessarily means concrete,
Okay,
and it necessarily means 48 or 52 inches wide.
okay,
And so we won't have any flexibility on it.
okay,
Historically, the village's policy currently is that outside of the sidewalk district we already have, which is basically the main street from, actually, we included part of Hector Street, from Pease to the post office, and Main Street from the post office to Not My Dad's, and now we're contracting with the town for the stretch to the Sure Safe, and all of South Street. So that's kind of the village's existing sidewalk district. Outside of that, if anyone wants to rip up the slate in front of their home, they can.
Right.
If anyone wants to pave the strip in front of their home, they can. And then it remains their responsibility. We went around and around and around and around and around for a long time, some time ago, about should we, particularly on those stretches like South Street, Main Street outside of the downtown core, should we do what Watkins and Ithaca does and say that we're installing sidewalk in the right of way because we can, and you're maintaining it and getting a fine if you don't. And I forget which board it was, which incarnation of this board it was. We decided that seemed like a bit of a burden on the residents. And so we were going to have DPW take care of all of that sidewalk. We would need to revisit that question.
if it expanded to
If it
8 or 9
expanded.
miles, yeah.
So, as you were talking, one thought was, we did South Street from Main Street to Tamarack. So it was an obvious artery off of Route 96. There are other obvious arteries off of Route 96 that could use sidewalk, like Washington Street
Right.
was the obvious one.
Which
Union,
has some.
Union to the conservatory, and then you get a question, what about Hugo Street? What about Congress? So the immediate roads that connect to 96 seem like a good place to start. We have the precedent of South Street. It doesn't answer the question of who's going to maintain it.
Right,
And you are going to have a situation where we lay down sidewalk where somebody won't get to it in time. There'll be an inch of snow, or there won't be, it's not going to be evenly maintained all the time. It's just not a possibility, given people's schedules and everything else. So are we going to accept some level of uneven snow removal, in particular being the big one? Are we going to walk down the road of, which we avoided before, of trying to force residents to care for the sidewalk in front of their house? Or are we just going to add miles to the snowplow tractor? And I don't know that last one is the wrong answer. It's just something that we have to think through logistically. One of the things we did talk about when hiring a 5th DPW employee was, as these things expand, what if we do get the big grant dollars for all of West Main? We're going to need an extra individual to do that work. So this may not be a large expansion off of that. And it's also not the kind of thing you start talking about side streets. it's not like a big grant project where all of a sudden, all of the side streets are.
Right.
Or
down the
sidewalk.
sidewalks, right.
If it is going to be a 7 to 10 year incremental process, I think it'll take all of that time at a couple hundred feet a year
Mhm.
to get village side streets paved. But I mean, the number of people I see in the street, going up Elm Street, and down Halsey Street, and walking all the way around the village, especially when it's warmer, there's a lot of foot
There's a
traffic.
lot of foot traffic.
A lot of foot traffic. Narrower streets are least safe. They tend to be a little quieter, but that also means you're walking in the middle of the road and you don't hear the car coming because you've got your earbuds in.
And now we have electric vehicles, so it'll be increasingly more.
So sorry.
I'll jump in a little bit. So I've certainly thought about this quite a bit. I think like big picture, I really think it's important for all the reasons that Jess put together. My primary motivator just being the I don't think this could be more clear out of the data from the comp plan that like people want this, right? I'm a little less worried about kind of what's the end game around it. I really do just, I like the thought of, we have to do a little planning to figure out what's the appropriate amount of money to put away on an annual basis and kind of have to plan that. But I like the idea of kind of taking it piece by piece and year by year. And I think to put a kind of maybe a different spin on things, I'm not convinced, and this is actually a bit of a change for me and talking with Ben, I'm not convinced that every road needs to have sidewalk. And I don't, initially I was very much of that, like, we need this is for safety, we don't want people on the road. The more and more I think about it, especially when you think about these quieter side streets and maybe even some of the less quiet side streets, while there are certainly close calls, I don't recall anyone actually getting into particular trouble on these side streets. I think the reality is, outside of the really large thoroughfares, South Street probably being one of them, that we know are particularly dicey, there's side streets in the village. People generally go pretty slow. They're pretty reasonable about sharing the road with bikers, with walkers, and so forth. And so that's not to say that we couldn't eventually get there, but I also think that there's a real sense of there are a larger span, I think, of important to less important roads. And I don't think we have to kind of set our sights on every road has a sidewalk. I think we can probably work through, and this is what Ben and I have been trying to work through, and we haven't quite nailed it all the details, but you know, we've got some studies that help us. We have kind of our own intuition how we prioritize these things. And it's a combination of, you know, safety, connection to downtown. In some parts, what's easy for the DPW to take off, you know, like if there's parts I think that the DPW could do on their own if it's kind of a straight shot stretch of road, and obviously more volunteer hands the better. And if we need to bring in an extra person or two for a week to kind of help through with that, that'd be great too. But I think there's a lot that can be done by kind of funding it and appropriately planning for, hey, every year there's a week of sidewalk work for the DPW. And I know Dusty is great about bringing in people and bringing in Alan and getting volunteers and managing all those things. So that's all to say, I like the vision. I think we should go for it. I wouldn't want to get too caught up in too many details. I think the plowing thing is interesting. You know, my personal take is like, again, I wouldn't get too worried about having every piece of sidewalk perfectly plowed every morning. It's not right now. I think we could start small, iterate, have people be responsible for it to start. And if it becomes a burden or we're seeing it's becoming a real overhead and pain to manage and to enforce, then, you know, we can kind of make a different decision.
So I'm going to chime in quickly, mostly to reiterate what Ben said, which I agree with broadly, but also to add that in my mind, you know, when we started our conversations, it was really what is walkable. And for me, in a lot of places in the village, you know, I live on Cuga Street, so Cuga Street's a great example. I think, to be quite honest, and I know that this is me and maybe is not an opinion that's shared widely, but for me, having people walking on the street is a value add in terms of like a quaint village, right? I would rather have people walking in the street with a low speed limit than 8 feet of paved sidewalk, like gleaming and, you know, with tractors running up and down it twice a day whenever it snows and all of that. Like, to me, that is the opposite of quaint, whereas having like slow, subdued traffic and people walking on the street is good. So obviously there's a balance, right? Like Ben said, that I think there's a route that's sort of an in-between, kind of iterating, thinking strategically about safety in particular as sort of the primary mover of this. So like things like Lake Street start to look really attractive. Union Street, I think, also is kind of, just because it's so central. So for me, that's really the perspective. The other thing I want to add just quickly is that one thing that we don't do currently is maintain the sidewalks that we have. So like outside of plowing, which we obviously do, but our sidewalks have started to heat from the Main Street project. There's like weird asphalt patches in our brickwork and things like that. So I think in terms of a capital plan, I think you're like 100% on the money. This is sort of what we've been working on putting together, is what does that number look like just for, you know, first steps.
Main Street project is 15 years old.
I
Yeah.
know.
So when you think about it from that perspective, it's in fantastic shape, given how long it's actually been.
Right. But not given that, it's in terrible shape.
Right.
I mean, there's an aluminum plate over a 6-foot section, which just blows my mind.
I think that all of that too is what's really ringing for me, is starting with the major arteries where you can be ADA compliant, and remembering as we think of the small streets that you are now asking older people and people who are in wheelchairs or whatever to be in the street. So just to throw that out there. And I don't know that changes, because that's what they would be doing right now anyway.
Well, and strollers, I mean, you mentioned, there's
And
certainly a lot of reasons.
burdening Cayuga with a sidewalk, and there's some sidewalk there. So I think that if we look at the major things and start there, which is where Gordon sort of led us, I think, in the beginning discussion, and then we can reconvene and say, okay, so we did that. What about the rest of the 5 miles?
Right, and part of the trick is that the DPW has never maintained the sidewalk, so we don't really know what that costs, right? Like Dusty has been looking into getting quotes for what does it
Oh, you
take
mean
to.
the physical structure of it, not the plowing.
Right. So like I hadn't really paid too close attention, but Ben brought it to my attention. The corner in front of where the bus stop is in front of the library, it's just a mess.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
things all over the place. So
Yeah.
it's that sort of, there's all these different buckets of, there's areas that don't have any sidewalk that maybe we want. There's areas that have slate that should be maybe like removed or replaced. Then there's parts of Main Street project that should be enhanced and kind of brought back to what they were at. So there's a couple different buckets, and not to muddy the waters, but that, I mean, that's, I think, where having, like, whether it's this board or Ben and I and Dusty or whatever, come up with of like, okay, this year we've got 10,000 to put forward. What's that get us? What's our
Right,
top
there's maintenance and then
thing?
there's expansion.
And we can kind of have this board kind of give that broad direction of, we think we should prioritize these things, and then kind of action on that.
And I would even be so bold, Gordon, as to say, I think it would be irresponsible of us to ignore a sidewalk project, given the voice of the community.
Yeah, I would like to see more, obviously time is a factor, manpower is always an issue, but I would like to see more of that heave sidewalk maintenance work done in the spring, you know, after, when is it reliably thaw in the spring? So we're talking June, right? I mean, whenever we're relatively sure we're not gonna get another frost, you know, at least take a day where someone goes out with some orange paint cannon, does a little highlighting of new heave and whatnot, so that, you know, someone sees it so they don't trip, and then figure out a way to prioritize the repair of it. I don't want to see allocated capital get gobbled up by, you know, that's difficult to repair, so we need a contract for it. If it's a skill set that, which actually I think, particularly with our newest hire, I think the skill set now exists on the DPW to actually tackle some of that. That should be as much a priority as pothole, right? If we're going to fill a pothole, we should level the sidewalk that's heat through, which is over the winter kind of thing. And when you get into larger sections and, you know, flooring and what do we do with a steel plate? All right, well, probably that's something they can do as well, but it might take a little, you might need to call in some help for some expertise.
I know
And
that,
give them the training. I would also say, like, let's make sure that they have the skill set and support them, with the tools and the training they need as a DPW to be able to properly and successfully fix repairs.
well, and so, you know, I wouldn't hold Dusty to this, but his first pass of thought of, because we've been talking about this, is that he felt getting up Union Street was probably within their wheelhouse, but maybe dealing with the different parts of Main Street, not as much. And so he was looking for some quotes around that and seemed to know someone local that he thought would be able to do a good job. So,
It did seem like the heaves were actually a more challenging
Yeah.
question than I had anticipated.
yeah, it seemed right. It seems like it's a lot easier to rip something out and put something fresh back in than kind of touch up different pieces that are gone a while.
Restoration is always a special skill set.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, 2022.
Okay,
And to just reiterate what Ben had said, if Dusty had been looking at some of these, and I've been pushing him to get some quotes on some of the stuff. If that remains important, I'm happy to keep pushing him on that and getting at least that piece of information. That's one small piece of the puzzle, and I think this is a larger conversation.
yeah, no, I think, look, I think, I don't want to pick on anybody on that crew, but if we ask the fire department to do something, the assumption is, and I think the assumption on their part is that they'll figure out a way to do it. Until they figure out they can't do it, then they'll tell us we need someone else to do it. I think historically, at times, DPW has leaned in the direction of, well, let's go get a quote for it. And I think that there can be a lot more in-house. I believe now that there is a lot more in-house knowledge and problem-solving skills that can allow for them to take a, well, let's see if we can do it ourselves first approach, which I don't know has always been the case. And hey, if they can't fix the heave because it requires them to jackhammer out 80 feet of sidewalk and then re-pour it, they fine. But if what they can do, they should.
Right. Yeah, that's fine. Makes sense.
But then on top of that, if we're going to, as a planned approach, if we're going to allocate some meaningful amount of dollars, we're not talking 5,000, we're talking 50.
Right.
So the budget numbers look like. Then that just adds more. So
Right.
now between $50,000 plus community build time, I think we can do a lot of sidewalk every year, both in repair and renovation.
Yeah. Yeah, at that point, that gets interesting. I want to say that the South Street community build was nearish 10, a little under, I think. And that took, most of a week of a bunch of volunteers in the DPW. I start wondering if it's not a matter of skill, but time too, that we'll have to
And
start
I think we
working
could have
through.
had more volunteers. Like I didn't help solicit for volunteers. Like there were.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think-
it's fun. It was actually, it's hard work, but it's satisfying.
Yeah,
It's fun.
well, there's parts of it that make it difficult to go a lot faster than
Sure.
that too. So,
But a meeting like just factoring in, I
Right.
think that we could raise a little bit of.
no, I think
have
you're
a
exactly,
picnic.
I think you're exactly right. Anyhow, I think these are all the kind of conversations we need to work through is, I think if we said, could we do 5 times as much?
Oh.
And say it took, if that was 10,000, we're putting 50,000, we want to do 5 times as much. We don't have 5 weeks to be doing just
Right.
sidewalks. So
Right.
we'll have to sort out what that all
Yeah.
looks like and what makes sense, right?
And I think we should go back and look, there's a South Street piece, there was the Week Street piece from south to the middle school. Kind of take a look at, okay, how long did it take? How many people did help? What was the cost? Because I think if it's part of a more better articulated and more comprehensive strategy that the village can say, hey, you're next, so why don't you help with this?
Yeah.
I think we'll get a lot more help. Because it has always just been, Alan Vogel has been referred to by some as a force of nature, right? When he decides he wants to do the next stretch of sidewalk, we're getting the next stretch of sidewalk done. So that has not lent itself to the broader community having any idea what was
Right.
really happening, because there was no strategy. The strategy was, wasn't what Alan wants to do next, which is great as far as that goes. But if it becomes part of a broader strategy, which we can communicate, and we can prioritize it, and we can say, okay, 2022 is this, and 2023 is that. Sorry, you have to wait a year, but can you help us this year on this? Because I think that it all lends itself to more potential community involvement in some of that, which doesn't answer any of the questions about who's plowing it and salting and shoveling it and whatnot. But I agree that we don't need to get bogged down in those future details. Shouldn't keep us. The devil in those future details shouldn't keep us from doing the work today.
One other thought, just on kind of moving things along too. I think we've done a little bit of this with street trees, is this idea of like a matching fund as well. And I don't know if that it's not always going to make sense if some homeowner puts, 20 feet of sidewalk in front of their house with no connection. It's kind of not great, but there could be something along the lines of, hey, we're trying to get to this next, but we're not quite there. And you could connect in easily. If you want to foot half the bill, we'll foot the other half, and you can get it done privately.
Yeah.
As long as it's all equitable distribution and there's no hint of nepotism or backdoor decision making.
Right.
Just.
So, so writing a like catalyzation type program like that is just all you write it.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and we had that kind of now defunct sidewalk fund, where if someone wanted to repair their sidewalk, we had a few $100s we would help them
Oh,
with.
cool.
But I'd almost like to take the other side of that, which is, instead of us matching a few paltry dollars towards something you're doing, how about you match your physical effort against all of the dollars being spent in the ground kind of approach, and just, it'll either work or it won't.
I'm officially holding a small detail for a future conversation, in case anyone wants to follow. So.
You have sidewalk contracting experience? All right, so to be continued.
Can I just add that I would say that, one, I think the way we envisioned a LEAPS committee is, I think there's an area for a discussion on this within that group, in terms of, do you see, going back to Ben's point, which I thought was interesting about the quaintness of the village versus laying more concrete. How much do you see sidewalks as a public safety issue?
Yeah.
Certainly we get pretty consistent complaints about speed on Halsey, the intersection of Halsey and Elm, South, Bradley, Cayuga, places where people feel it's narrow and it's hard to walk. So how do we, what do people feel about giving up aesthetics for safety? Also, is there, how many people in the village, despite it maybe not being as flat and even as it used to be, how many people like their slate? How many people like the aesthetics of the slate? Because it is oldie timey and all that stuff. So that's another consideration that I think about. Generally, I love sidewalks. I want more of them. I think it's hard to not have a comprehensive sidewalk strategy in combination with something like a green space strategy, because we know parking's a premium. So it's kind of seems off to have grand visions for green space, but not necessarily have a way for people to get there. Right. And so that, I think, is big. But maybe the thing I really jumps out at me as this discussion has evolved is, and this might be a little off topic, but it feels incredibly linked to being able to do a lot of this, is we need to have some sort of civic involvement recruitment, because we're putting a lot of the future on this stuff on people that are currently in their 70s. And they've been our leaders and they've been great volunteers, but if this is a 10-year plan, I don't know, and volunteerism is a big part of this. Like, how do we help inspire the next generation, the people with young families like ourselves that stand to benefit from the sidewalks? How do we get them involved? How do we Roar and I, we've talked about this with taking care of T-Bird. How do we get trainees in there to work with Karen Powers and Alan Vogel and, everyone that, because if you spend any time with taking care of T-Bird, Mrs. Darthler is the youthful cohort of the group. And so, as we think about, okay, how many volunteers did it take to do, South Street from Wake to Maine?
Sounds like you want to start spearheading a project's PR program.
No, see, I was just gonna say, and this may be a conversation over coffee or an adult beverage rather than a board meeting, but I actually think it's a generational issue. I think that generation that seems to always be able to volunteer and find volunteers, their version of inspiring volunteerism is a phone call that says, hey, I need you Saturday morning, can you come over?
Yeah.
Our version, and this I think applies to all of us, tends to lean in the direction of how can we get the word out and have people say, yes, I'll help. And I think that if we want the next generation of Karen Powers and Alan Vogels, I think that's either on us or someone like us to actually be the person that nags their friend and neighbor, not that Alan or Karen nag anybody ever, because we just say yes when they say something, but it's just the phone call, it's the, hey, don't forget tomorrow, 10 a.m. It's the list of people that will say yes, and eventually some people will stop returning the calls, and then they cross them off the list, and you find someone new who will return your calls. And it's the gentle cajoling and the occasional arm twisting. That's how volunteerism, I think, has always succeeded in the past. Yes, there will be some who are eagerly raising their hand. But I think a lot of the time it's less hand raising and more it's less volunteering and more voluntolding.
Sure.
in a lot of
Yeah, I mean,
cases.
I think there's probably an argument where that the younger generation is much more invested in policy influencing than it is getting the hands dirty. So how do we connect the two, right? How do
We just show them what a heck of a good time a barn raising really is, and we bring all the generations.
And that's coming from someone, look, that has no technical
Yeah, you can run a
skill,
shovel
really.
though.
Well,
in the matter, but I'm willing to learn, right? And so how do we inspire,
I think Roden's right, and I think the way you get from there to something that's meaningful is you just do it and you keep
Yeah.
doing it, and then you have a built-in base that's familiar, and then when you get the phone call, you know who's going to come.
Well,
It builds organically, but I think you're right that you start with the phone calls, right? No one comes unless it's a big event, like when we did the tree planting last year.
Right.
That was a big enough event that people did come, but in general, I think for something like a sidewalk build, I think you're 100% right.
You need a personal touch.
Well,
There's
and I
so many
mean-
things in people's faces all the time.
we all, and we all have, I think scheduling is always an issue, gotta be the only board in Tompkins County where everyone, has young kids, right? So, but that aside, if all five of us could find a day where we could all be at the same place at the same time, I'm sure that all five of us could find two other people. to
Oh,
come,
yeah.
right? So then now you've got 15.
They would be very small people, but they would be.
Are they handy with a shovel?
They really like shovels.
Define hand.
Yeah.
So again, I'm excited. I think this has a lot of teeth. This is a good direction.
All right. Item number 9 is our second privilege of the floor, and I don't see anyone from the public. However, if Mary or Ann have anything additional to add? If not, then I would entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss a number of personnel matters as well as collective bargaining subject to the Taylor law.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Vicky, I'm gonna have you stick around. Tammy, I'm gonna bid you good night.
Thanks, Tammy.
Let me just stop.
Good night, people.
Night.
And the lights.
Good night.